There are many words that can describe this past season for Florida State, one of them being disappointing. The offense and defense struggled to get going, and the players that were brought in from the portal did not live up to the hype. They finished the year 2-10, and were about as far away from the college football playoff as I am from 1 million subscribers. And it didn't really matter how the season went after the first 3 games. They could have finished 7-5 and won the Duke's Mayo Bowl, and it still would have been seen as a disappointment because of the standards that were set the previous year. But instead of continuing to torture myself as a Seminoles fan by talking about this current team, I'm going to go back to the good times of 1 year ago. Even if that 1 year feels like a full lifetime ago by this point. But before we look back at the 2023 campaign, let's quickly look at how we got here. In the years leading up to 2022, Florida State was mediocre at best. It had been quite a while since they had been considered true championship contenders, and a lot of that had to do with the departure of longtime head coach Jimbo Fisher. Once he left in 2017, the program tried to fill that void with Willie Taggart, but all it did was produce 2 bad seasons, ending with him getting fired in the 9th game of his final year. One of the bigger issues, in my opinion at least, with Willie was that he could never land any of the top recruits, which is pretty damning at a school like Florida State. So another head coaching search came and went, and though it looked like they could hire Deion Sanders, they ended up picking former Memphis coach Mike Norvell. And while Norvell had not been an outstanding recruiter to this point, he had received acclaim for his player development. Memphis during his tenure had not even cracked the top 50 in recruiting classes, but they always ended up having some of the better offenses in the country, so it was hoped that he could bring the Noles some of that magic. The first 2 seasons of Norvell's tenure at Florida State were nothing to write home about. The team finished 3-6 in 2020 and 5-7 in 2021. They would show flashes of their potential, like when they beat number 5 North Carolina, took Notre Dame to overtime, or when Jordan Travis led a game-winning drive against Miami. But there were also plenty of frustrating moments as well, like when they got smoked by Louisville or let Jacksonville State walk them off at home. However, this would not be the worst moment of 2021 for the Noles. Travis Hunter, the number 1 recruit in the nation, committed to Florida State in March of 2020, but after 1 visit in November the next year, he would flip his commitment to Jackson State, making him the first 5-star recruit to sign with an FCS school. And I think we all know how well his career has turned out. 2022 wasn't looking to be much different than the previous years, but what happened next would be a pleasant surprise. The team started off 4-0, then were 4-3, before winning 6 straight and finishing the year 10-3 and 11th in the final AP poll. The final win of the year came in dramatic fashion in the Cheez-It Bowl against Oklahoma, when Ryan Fitzgerald nailed a 32-yard field goal to give the Noles a late lead. But how can you follow up such a surprising season? Most of Florida State's better players looked like they could go to the NFL, so they would be right back where they started. Well, to the shock of many, most of these players announced that they would be back for 2023. Quarterback Jordan Travis, running back Trey Benson, receiver Johnny Wilson, and defensive end Jared Verse were just some of the seniors who said they were coming back. Combine that with some good work in the transfer portal, and this team was set up to be the best Florida State team in almost a decade. Many experts foresaw another year of winning in Tallahassee. Some even felt like they could win the ACC. But I don't think anyone was truly able to see the crazy season that was in store. Week 1, Camping World Stadium in Orlando, Florida. The 8th-ranked Florida State Seminoles took on the 5th-ranked LSU Tigers. This was a rematch from the previous year, in a game that saw Florida State block the game-tying extra point to win. Both teams came into the game looking to establish themselves as national championship contenders, and the message was clear when this game wrapped up. The offense did take some time to get going, but once the second half came around, they were unstoppable. Johnny Wilson and portal acquisition Keon Coleman combined for 226 of Jordan Travis's 342 passing yards. Coleman himself caught 3 touchdowns. Even when the offense would make mistakes, the defense would make sure that nothing would come from them. While LSU scored 17 points in the first half, they wouldn't score again until the game was well out of reach. The defense smothered Jaden Daniels and did a great job containing the rushing attack. It was clear that we could be in for something special. Week 2 saw the Noles make quick work of Southern Miss at home, but that was just getting them ready for what was to come next. Their Week 3 game against Boston College seemed like more of the same. The Noles got back to work, building a 31-10 lead in the third quarter and looking like they were cruising to another easy win. However, the offense stagnated, and Boston College would start to chip away at the lead. 1 touchdown wasn't terrible, but the momentum really started to swing when BC recovered a Lawrence Toafili fumble for a touchdown. The pressure was on. It continued as the Eagles used multiple explosive plays to make it a 2-point game. What would save Florida State from this collapse? Their defense. On BC's final drive of the game, Kalen DeLoach would sack Tom Castellanos to force Boston College to punt. 1 face mask penalty later, and the Noles would leave the game at 3-0. But the fun wasn't over quite yet. Week 4 saw the team travel to Death Valley to play a Clemson team that had so far fallen below expectations, but they could easily get back on track with a win against the number 4 team in the country. Florida State was thoroughly outplayed by the Tigers. They could not stop Cade Klubnik and the Clemson running backs. The offense came out sluggish, and they didn't really get anything going until the second quarter. Even then, they were still trailing in the second half. They needed something to go their way if they wanted to get back into this game. And they did.
Here's a blitz, and Klubnik didn't see it coming. He got blasted by Kalen DeLoach, who has the ball and is heading toward the end zone. Touchdown, Florida State.
This play would get the Noles back in it, but their offense was still not producing, and the teams exchanged punts. Eventually, Clemson would get a drive going late in the fourth quarter, eventually setting up a chip shot field goal to take the lead with under 2 minutes to go. It was looking like the undefeated season would come to an end, until
a 30-yard kick, and it is no good!
they catch another break. In overtime, the offense wasted no time getting on the board, and after another clutch stop, the Noles left Death Valley 4-0. At this time, watching this team made me realize that we really were in for something special. The way that they played these close games and found ways to win reminded me of those teams from 2013 and 14. Moments like these gave the fans thoughts of basking in national championship glory once again. In the following weeks, Florida State would continue to stack wins, in less dramatic fashion. They surged in the second half against Virginia Tech, and Syracuse never stood a chance. And although it took a while, they would eventually pull away and beat 16th ranked Duke. After another easy win against Wake Forest, Florida State was now 8-0, and it seemed like their winning ways would continue without any problems going into their next matchup. They were playing against Pitt, a team that was currently sitting near the bottom of the ACC. Shouldn't be much of a game if they played like they had been, right? Well, that was the case until some news broke hours before the game. Both Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson would miss the game with undisclosed injuries, meaning that the Noles would be without their two best receivers for this game. That would mean that they would have to run the ball more and go to other less experienced options in the passing game. Like we had seen multiple times throughout the year, the offense took some time to get going. At least this time it made a little sense. Florida State found themselves down 7-0 midway through the second quarter, and it would have been even worse if Kanata Mumpfield didn't fumble the ball at the 1-yard line. However, the offense did start to move thanks to some unlikely sources. Junior wide receiver Ja'Kai Douglas came into the game with only 2 catches for 36 yards, but he took full advantage of his increased role, finishing the Pitt game with 6 catches for 115 yards. The tight ends also stepped up. Kyle Morlock and Marqueston Douglas combined for over 120 yards, and Douglas scored a key touchdown in the third quarter to put the Noles up by 10. A 55-yard touchdown run by Trey Benson the next drive would all but be the dagger in Pitt's heart. Despite not having their best offensive options, Florida State was now 9-0. This game also guaranteed them a spot in the ACC championship game. I guess this could be seen as good rest for Wilson and Coleman, as next week's game would be against one of their biggest rivals, the Miami Hurricanes. This would be another back-and-forth affair. Despite starting the game out with a 10-point lead for Florida State, the game would be tied at halftime. Both teams would then trade field goals before the Noles made quick work of the Miami defense to go up by 7. The defense would continue to do their job, and the offense would find the end zone again early in the fourth quarter. With the way this game was going, being down by 2 scores with around 8 minutes to go seemed like an impossible hurdle to overcome for Miami. The clock was the friend of the Noles and the enemy of the Hurricanes. As long as Miami didn't score quickly, Florida State could close this one out, but that was not the case. The pressure was on Florida State once again, and it continued to build when a Miami sack forced the Noles to punt. Things would get interesting on the final drive, as starting quarterback Emory Williams looked to have hurt his arm on a 4th down conversion. This forced previous starter Tyler Van Dyke into the game, and he took no time making an impact. 2 straight 15-yard completions to Colby Young to set the Hurricanes up in midfield with under a minute to go. The defense would need to figure things out quickly, and that they did. 2 incompletions and an interception would seal the game, and the Noles were now 10-0. With this win, it seemed like nothing else would get in their way on the road to the college football playoff. North Alabama looked to be a deer in the way of the Florida State semi-truck. Some expected, understandably so, that the starters would be able to rest after the first half. Of course, given how the team had played throughout the year, it should really come to the shock of nobody that they started off slow. Before anyone really knew what was going on, North Alabama was up 13-0. An irritating start for sure, but we've seen this happen with other teams before. There's plenty of game left. They should be able to recover and get an easy win.
First down, and across midfield for Jordan Travis. Late in the quarter. 16 yards on the rush, and he's clutching his left leg.
This moment right here was the moment that Florida State's playoff chances died. In what was supposed to be just a tune-up game, Florida State loses the cornerstone of their offense, someone who had been there since the program was in the mud. I'm sure that sports fans could tell you exactly where they were when they witnessed injuries like this, especially if that player was on their team, and I'm no exception. That day, my brother and I had driven to South Bend to watch Notre Dame play since we were given front row tickets. The game ended late, and it was about a 5-hour drive from South Bend to our house. I was keeping up with the game as I was driving, and it was already kind of annoying that they were down early, but I figured they'd be fine. Then I get a text from my dad saying that Travis had broken his leg, and from that point, I basically went through all 5 stages of grief. And at the end of it all, I just felt sad. A dream season. Coming to an end like this? Just my luck, man. It cannot be understated how important Jordan Travis was to the team and the fan base. He had become the face of the program in the last couple of years. So to see him go out like this was just brutal, man. The Noles would score 58 straight points to improve to 11-0, but that seemed rather meaningless after what they had witnessed in the first quarter. 2 days later, it was confirmed that Jordan Travis would be out for the year with a fractured ankle, meaning that backup Tate Rodemaker would be starting against Florida. The environment at the Swamp would only intensify this rivalry matchup. There would be some growing pains with Rodemaker running the offense, meaning that the team would have to rely more on the running game. The defense held their own until a questionable targeting penalty resulted in a Gators touchdown. A sack in the end zone would give Florida a 12-0 lead, but some hope would come with Florida State's final drive of the half. Big runs by Trey Benson and Lawrence Toafili, along with some nice throws by Rodemaker, finally got the Noles on the board. Florida tried to make them pay at the end of the half, but they couldn't get the job done. Trey Benson would give the Noles the lead back, and it would be a 2-point game after both teams exchanged field goals. Tensions would rise on Florida State's final drive. Rodemaker was leading the Noles down the field to potentially put the game away, but the drive looked to be stalling out. 3rd and 14 with nobody open, Rodemaker looked to be well short, but he was absolutely leveled as he was sliding. It looked to be textbook targeting. Jaden Hill would be ejected from the game, but Tate Rodemaker would also exit the game, leaving the team's fate in the hands of true freshman quarterback Brock Glenn. The Noles quickly learned that he didn't need to throw the ball, putting the ball in the hands of Trey Benson instead. This would prove to be a smart move, as Benson would seal the game with a 26-yard touchdown run. The Noles were now 12-0, and only the ACC championship game sat between them and a spot in the college football playoff. Around this time, there was a lot of speculation regarding Florida State's playoff chances. They had won, but the field was extremely competitive. Going into conference championship weekend, the top 4 teams were undefeated, and the next 4 only had 1 loss. There was a feeling that even with a win in the ACC championship, they could get jumped by a team below them if any of those teams won their conference. They had already been somewhat experiencing this during the regular season if they didn't win by a large margin. But they couldn't think about that. The goal was the same as it was for the previous 12 games: win. Sure, they had lost Jordan Travis, but the defense was still great, and Rodemaker showed that he was a decent game manager. However, Rodemaker's health would come into question as the week progressed. See, he had suffered a concussion due to the hit that he took the previous week in Gainesville. It seemed like he would still play against Louisville, but it was later reported that he would be a game-time decision. But even hours before kickoff, Rodemaker intended to play. He warmed up before the game, and he came out to the field in his gear. But right before kickoff, it was announced that Brock Glenn would be starting for the Noles in their most important game of the year. Norvell stated that the game plan wouldn't change much with Glenn starting, but some changes would need to be made as the game went on. The first half was an elite punting showcase. Neither side could get anything going offensively. There really wasn't much Florida State could do with Glenn at the helm. He was simply too raw. Most of his throws were short routes and screens. Not a bad idea for a true freshman, but Louisville was having none of it. The defense would have to do the heavy lifting. There was no room for error. The first points from either side came early in the second quarter, thanks to 2 Louisville penalties, via the leg of Ryan Fitzgerald. They had a chance to add 3 more near the end of the half, but the attempt went wide. Around the college football world, Michigan was only up 10-0 on Iowa, and Alabama had defeated Georgia earlier in the day to capture the SEC title. Texas and Washington also won their respective conferences. If Florida State wanted any chance to secure their spot in the college football playoff, they needed to secure this win. Louisville would tie the game in their opening drive of the half, but it wouldn't take the Noles long to answer right back.
Earlier tonight, as he will run it again and gets a good block to break free. Lawrence Toafili, could he? Here he goes. And they push him out inside the 10. But a big chunk play for the Noles.
1 run later and it was 10-3. The way this game was going, it felt like this was the game winner. Not much came from either side besides another Louisville field goal, but as the game continued, Louisville's chances would dwindle. Something truly disastrous would need to happen for them to have any chance.
Jesse, their 8th 3 and out. Mastromano!
They come after him and they get him! Special teams surging in against the punter and taking him down!
At this point, it seemed like the game was over. The offense was non-existent besides one play, and the defense was playing on a 10-yard field. Worst case for Louisville, they would make it a 1-point game with all the momentum on their side. Someone would have to make a huge play to avoid disaster.
Four-man rush against Plummer to the end zone this time, and it's intercepted by Bethune. He made a great play earlier and comes up with the pick in the end zone. The Florida State defense does it again.
Once again, the defense steps up in the biggest moments. A couple drives later, the offense would actually score some more points, making it 13-6. With just over 3 minutes left, it looked like one more stop would seal the game. Could they do it?
Plummer on 4th and 7, wrapped up and taken down by Fisk. Oh, as he had a night.
Braden Fisk closed the door on the Cardinals, and Ryan Fitzgerald would officially seal the game with another field goal. It was over. Despite losing 2 quarterbacks and starting a true freshman in the conference championship game, Florida State was a perfect 13-0. It seemed like the committee would have no choice but to put the Noles in the playoff. I mean, they couldn't leave an undefeated Power 5 champion out of the playoff, right? Right? Selection Sunday was underway. Everyone had an idea about who the top 3 teams would be. It was just about who would secure that final spot. For the sake of drama, they revealed 1, 2, 3, and 6 before showing 4 and 5. We finally get there, and...
Who's number 4? And Alabama returns to the playoff.
When that Alabama logo flashed across the screen, I felt a pit in my stomach. It's a day that still brings some bitterness out of me even a year later. Even after winning the rest of their games despite losing Jordan Travis, it still wasn't good enough. You can see the dread from the players and coaches as they witnessed all their hard work go up in smoke. Understandably, there was outrage from the sports world. The consensus was that it was absolutely ridiculous that an undefeated Power 5 champion be left out of the playoff. Mike Norvell and ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips made their opinions known about this decision. As to the rationale behind this decision, we'll get to that later. Florida State's consolation prize was getting matched up against Georgia in the Orange Bowl. This felt like nothing. I sure as hell didn't care about this game, and it felt like that was the move for Florida State as well. As the weeks went on, we kept hearing about more players opting out of the game. Whether it was for injury, the draft, or the portal, 28 players did not play for Florida State. And I completely understand. This game against Georgia would be a lose-lose situation. If you win, then it's like, great, but you're not playing for a national championship, and if you lose, then it's just going to look like the committee made the right call. The Florida State Seminoles team that took the field against Georgia was a shell of the team that just won the ACC championship. It looked like their JV team was out there. The Georgia game was an absolute massacre. They never stood a chance. 63-3 was the final score, and their record was no longer unconquered. This game brought a lot of criticism towards Florida State. Some even said that this game proved that they didn't belong in the playoff, that this team didn't deserve to play for a national championship. And yeah, they're right. The team that took the field against Georgia did not deserve to make the playoff, so great call there, genius. Not that it really meant much, but Alabama would lose to Michigan in the CFP. A hollow victory for Seminoles fans that only went so far. But let's talk about it now. Did Florida State deserve to make the playoff? I know it's going to sound extremely biased since I made it clear in this video that I am a fan, but I would say yes, and let me explain. The rationale behind putting Alabama in the playoff over Florida State was for things like quality wins and strength of schedule. But the big one, of course, was that Florida State was not the same team without Jordan Travis. Yes, that is true, but football is the ultimate team game. We saw that with how they performed against Florida and Louisville. They still had strong offensive pieces and a top defense in the country, but let's just throw all that away because they lost their quarterback. This would be proven even more when Florida State had 10 players taken in the 2024 NFL Draft, the third most out of any school, only trailing Texas and Michigan. The following year, the college football playoff would expand to 12 teams. The 5 highest ranked conference champions would get an automatic bid into the playoff, meaning that something like this could never happen again. And while it is still somewhat flawed, it's a step in the right direction, and I hope that they continue to build on this and are open to more expansion later on. It's a shame that the legacy of this team, to many, will be that selection show and the following ass blasting they received from Georgia. 13-1, and most people are only going to remember the 1. Florida State today is not what they were even a year ago. The on-field product was underwhelming, and they remained the butt of the joke whenever CFP rankings were brought up.
Do you think Florida State should get in this year? I think there's always room.
But that's not how I'm going to remember this team. I'll always see them as the team that brought Florida State back to the top of college football. This was the first time that we were true contenders since I was in middle school, and it felt special. And not to get sentimental or anything, but it was also a nice way to bond with my dad. I became a Florida State fan years ago because of him, since it was something that just he and I had. So it was just really cool to come together and watch our team pull out these wins and be good for the first time in what felt like forever. And that's something that I hope we're able to see again. Probably not now, but hopefully not forever. But that's going to do it for this video. Let me know what y'all think. Did Florida State deserve to make the playoff, or am I just a bitter Seminole fan? Honestly, either answer is correct. Who do y'all think is winning the national championship? Let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch y'all later.